doing this morning? You know, we have been in a series that is we call it Prayer 101, and it is a series that is based upon the Lord's Prayer as found in Matthew chapter 6. And one of the things that I've said when we started this and talked about it is, number one, we have a habit. We always kind of repeat the Lord's Prayer. We say it verbatim. There's nothing wrong with saying the Lord's Prayer, from memory. But I'll be honest. I think that sometimes we lose some of the feeling of it. In fact, one of the things that we look at when in Jesus' time, one of the things that he was always bothered by when it came to the religious leaders was the fact that their prayers were just things that they had memorized. They were just things that they recited. They were not words that really seemed to have meaning for them. They had become a performance more than a prayer, and that bothered him. And so for that reason, I say that when Jesus gave an example of how to pray, when he said, "This then is how you should pray," I think he was saying, this is a model. This is an example of how to pray and what to pray for. And here's one of the dangers. I think sometimes when we simply say it, because we've said it so many times. I listened years ago an interview with President Ronald Reagan, and they were interviewing him about when he had spoken after the Challenger explosion. And he stepped up and he gave this speech, but in it he quoted a poem. It was very moving, and they had asked him, he said, "How in the world do you do that and not, in the magnitude of that moment, how do you not get overwhelmed?" And he said, "I have read and read and read and reread that poem so many times, and the speech in general, to where when I have read it enough, it took the emotion out of it for me, but it still carried the emotion." And I think that sometimes when we simply recite the Lord's Prayer and it becomes just that, rote memorization, sometimes it loses the emotion and the magnitude. And so that's the reason we've been going back and trying to kind of take this apart and look at it as a model. As we've looked, we go back in Matthew chapter 6, at the beginning of it, Jesus told us before he ever started teaching about or gave us the Lord's Prayer, in verses 5 through 8, he was talking about our attitude and what it should be when we pray. And he said we need to be humble, that we should be real. We need to pray as ourselves. And we need to keep it simple, not worry about all the big words and the flowery phrases. Then, he went after that, talking to Matthew 6:9. He said, "This then is how you should pray," is where he continued. And he told us that the first thing is we need to remember, and I think this is very crucial, always remember who it is that we are praying to. Okay? It is our Father in heaven. Holy, hallowed is your name. We are praying to the God of creation, the one who knit us together in our mother's womb. He is the all-powerful, all-knowing, omnipresent King of kings, Lord of lords. That's who we're having a conversation with. And as a result, our prayers should reflect that. And so I think that, number one, remembering we have that humble and real attitude, but secondly, remember who we're talking to. And then, we looked last week at how in verse 10, they are words that roll off of our lips so easily, but they're much more difficult to apply in our lives and in our spirit when we say, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, because ultimately what those words are, that is an invitation for God's eternal and all-powerful, his perfect kingdom to invade our temporary, flawed kingdom. That is a bold prayer to pray. And so now we're coming into where we're going to go into verse 11, and he says here, he tells us that we are to give us today our daily bread. Now, I think in order to understand what in the world that means to us, We need to understand what it meant to the person who would have been listening to Jesus teaching that day. What was bread in the first century? It was a staple. I mean, bread was a necessity to them. It was a part of everything. And we need to realize that we live in a far different time now. You go back, you don't have to go all that far back in history, but especially you get back to the first century, you get back to even before that, it was a hand-to-mouth existence. I mean, that was one of the reasons that, excuse me, the concept of a Sabbath's day rest was such a leap of faith. Because if you took a day off that you didn't sow, you didn't reap, you didn't tend, you didn't prepare, that you didn't do those things, then it could have a distinct effect, not just on the next day, but the next week, months, years. Okay? There were no refrigerators for you to keep leftovers in, and store stuff for a long time. There was no grocery store down the street that was stocked with plenty of everything that you could just run down to if you ended up, hey, well, we're a little bit short of something. There was none of that. Okay? So it was a leap of faith to take a day off and not how many of you, if you didn't go to the grocery store this week, how many of you would starve to death in 7 days? Gary. Honestly, most of us wouldn't really struggle that much if we didn't go to the grocery store for 2 weeks. Man, there might not be any ding-dongs or, that stuff, but, Josh, but we wouldn't. We've got plenty. And that's the thing I think we need to understand. That sometimes gets lost on us when we read this phrase, to give us today our daily bread. And to us, that doesn't even really, it doesn't really click all that much. But to the listener, to those that were listening to Jesus preach that day, they would have heard him saying, when he said, give us today our daily bread, they would have heard it for what it is. Give us today what we need to survive. That's what that prayer was. See, it's a little bit different. It's a little bit different than the pretty plates that we have that say, give us today our daily bread and all this stuff. This is about survival. Now, there's a great example of it. If you go back to the Old Testament, you read in the book of Exodus. And, in Exodus, the Israelites have been enslaved in Egypt for over 400 years. And then God comes, and in his providence, he leads them out of Egypt. Okay, and so for 430 years, they have been slaves in this land. And now they walk out of Egypt as free men, women, and children. Now, it's an amazing testimony. And 45 days later, they're like, can we go back? I mean, think that's really what they said. Exodus 16, verse 3. Here they're sitting around there complaining, and they're like, there in Egypt, we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted, but you brought us out here in the desert to starve this whole assembly to death. We should have just stayed there, died there. Talk about short-term memory. Then we find that then God promises, he tells Moses that what he's going to do is he's going to send bread from heaven. He said that night that they will have quail, and makes a promise to them. And what we know is that, he said that he would send it to them every day. And that's important. Each and every day he was going to rain down bread from heaven. It was a little white. It was kind of a flaky substance that would just kind of cover the ground. And the people would go out and they would gather it. And this had never happened before, obviously. So they needed something to call it. And so it was called manna, which now when we talk about manna from heaven, we kind of have a phrase, that we use it that way. Today, the word manna means ration or portion is actually what it's defined as. But it is, when you translate it into English, it's really, and we read it, it's what is it? Okay? What is it? It didn't have no clue. What is it? That's what we'll call it. Though I think probably there were plenty others that were sitting around and their word was actually, is this it? Because that's what we do, isn't it? We complain. We got something that falls in our laps and we're like, is this really all there is? It's human nature. It's what we do. We simply, we complain about everything. And so, not only was God feeding them, we find that, but he was teaching them a lesson. I think he was teaching them something about themselves. He was also teaching them something about him, and he was teaching them a lesson about the covenant relationship that they had entered into. And like I said, he said he was going to feed them every day. And here's what happened is that it came down in the morning. They were to go out and they were to gather just enough for that day. Okay? That's all they were together. Because then they would go home and they could make it into little cakes. They could make it into bread. But anything that they kept, if they tried to stock up until the next day when they got up in the morning, then it would stink and be full of maggots. Okay? Except on the Sabbath. Okay? On Friday, they would go out and they were to gather twice as much. And then when they got up on Saturday morning, which was the Sabbath, what they had kept over from the day before did not stink. It didn't have maggots in it. And so God provided for them every single day in doing this. And I think we think about that account in relationship to what Jesus is teaching us here. And I think that it tells us a couple of things. One is that when Jesus says, give us this day our daily bread, he's teaching about an attitude of dependence upon God. It's also an attitude of gratitude for what we do have, rather than complaining about what we don't have, which seems to be what we always do. And I think that when we realize where things come from, have you ever had anybody that you really kind of didn't like? And then all of a sudden you find out that they've been like real generous maybe to you or to your family or to something you're involved in, and your attitude towards them changes? Have you ever had that happen? In other words, realizing where gifts come from has the impact of creating gratitude. It changes our attitude towards those people. It's the same way with our Heavenly Father. The difference is, what we need to understand is that everything comes from God. And so I think that one of the first things we need to do when we're talking about this giving today our daily bread and what we need, everything that we have comes from God. It all comes from him. But also, and hear this, okay? Listen to me. If you tuned out, tune back in, okay? Please, because you're gonna accuse me of like linguistic gymnastics is what you're going to accuse me of, but it's not the case. Okay? When we read the Bible, we tend to think of it, and we always think of God gave the Israelites manna from heaven for 40 years. Isn't that what we say? For 40 years, he gave them manna from heaven. Bread from heaven, for 40 years he fed them. That would be, 480 months. 14,600 days that God gave them manna from heaven. And what I submit to you is that, because the Israelites, think about this, they did not know. Now God knew. They didn't know that they were going to be wandering around in the desert, in the wilderness for 40 years. Okay? But see, God never promised. God never said, I'm going to send you 40 years worth of manna from heaven. He didn't even say, I'm going to send you 30, 20, 10. He never promised 12 months worth of bread from heaven. 6 weeks of bread from heaven. He never promised that, did he? No. Instead, what he did is he said, every day I will send you manna from heaven. Okay. Did you miss it? There's a difference. Okay. He could have provided, God knew what was going to happen. There are a variety of ways that he could have provided for the needs of them in the wilderness. But instead, manna from heaven every morning and twice on Fridays was exactly what was necessary, and it was perfect to feed over 1 million wandering pilgrims in the wilderness. It was perfect for it. But he didn't give them a year of bread. He didn't give them 20 years of bread, 40 years of bread. He gave them a day's worth of bread every day for 14,600 plus days. That's why they had to depend upon him. Like I said, and somebody's going to accuse me of verbal gymnastics. No, it's not. There's a difference. Because what you and I have is what's sitting in our pantry. It's what's in our refrigerator. And that is, I've got a week's worth of food. See, there's a difference between getting up and going, this is what I have for today. The attitude's different. The feeling is different. And that is the lesson that he taught them. And so when Jesus says, give us today our daily bread, I think there's two things he's teaching us. Number one, he is telling us that we need to ask for what we need. There's a big difference between need and greed. One's about necessity, and the other is about want. And let's be honest, we're a greedy bunch. We want a lot. Okay? But God says that he will provide it. And this goes back to remembering that he is our Heavenly Father. A good parent gives good gifts. A good parent gives gifts that are timely, that are a blessing instead of a burden, that they stretch us, they shape us, they encourage us. Our Heavenly Father has the same desires for us. Okay? And so he gives perfect gifts. But the thing to also keep in mind when we are talking about blessings in our lives is that God is all-knowing. You and I don't see everything. God sees our need today, but he also, he sees not only the direct consequences, but he sees the collateral damage for things that he gives to us. Okay? He sees what we need today, but he also recognizes what you and I would consider unforeseen circumstances. Have you ever had one of those times when you really, really, really need something, whatever it is, and that's just your focus, and it's what you're praying for, and then you get something that's a little bit different, and you're like, well, that really wasn't what I was looking for. And then a week or two or a month down the road, something happens, and you're like, wow, that was the perfect thing that I needed then because of what it provided here. Anybody ever had one of those situations? Am I the only one? Okay. See, because God sees that. Because he knows that. Because he's God. That's the difference. And that's where we need to trust. And so, yes, we need to ask for what we need. But there's another part of it, too. And it goes to James and Peter. They both record. James chapter 4, verse 6 is where he records it. But Peter records it as well. Because this is where this comes back to us. It says, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. And here's the point, is that when we look at that, please understand, the grace that he's talking about is not saving grace like we think about, okay? It is the ability to do what needs to be done in the moment for the moment. And so when we are talking about prayer, give us this day our daily bread, the grace that James and Peter both talk about is that ability to do what needs to be done now. That's when we come to him asking for our daily bread. And the concept is that God's working with us because we're dependent upon him, because we have humbled ourselves before him. But as long as you're trying to fix your own life, don't be surprised when it continues to circle the drain. Because God opposes the proud, but he gives grace, the ability to do what needs to be done in the moment, for the moment, to those who are humble. It's dependence of attitude. It's an attitude of dependence, trusting God. So my question is, I guess, what's your daily bread? If you were to say, give me today my daily bread, what is it? It may be something, who knows? It may have something to do with your work, maybe something in your marriage, maybe something that's going on at home, it may be something that you're struggling with, it may be an upcoming bill, it may be a situation at work, a decision. What we need to understand is that when we say, give me today my daily bread, give us today our daily bread, it's not just about food that's put on the table. It is about what you are going to face that day. You don't even know what it is. You don't know how that situation is going to turn out. But what you're doing is saying, God, I'm asking you today for the ability to do what needs to be done in the moment, for the moment, as I deal with my work, as I deal with my husband, as I deal with my wife, as I deal with my kids, as I deal with this relationship. That's what give us today our daily bread. It's not just about putting food upon the table. It's not even about, drawing a paycheck. It's so many things beyond that. Here, question for you. Okay, we're going to see who just shout it out. What is America's pastime? Wrong. I'm not going to say football, even though I think that's kind of where it is. You know what America's pastime is? It is worrying. America's pastime is worrying. We're good at it. We've heard the old saying that practice makes perfect, and so we have gotten really, really good at perfecting our worry because we practice it every day, don't we? We worry about the future, we worry about the past, we worry about what's happening on the other side of the world, we worry about what our neighbors are doing, and then we worry about what our neighbors think about what we're doing. We worry if we're going to have enough time, enough money, or any of this, the food, anything else. And then we worry that maybe we have too much time, food, money, etc. We worry about whether we're going to make the right decision. And then a year later, we start asking, did I make the right decision? So we worry about that as well. We worry about hypothetical situations. We worry about things we have absolutely no control over. And then we worry about whether or not we're worrying about the right things and if we're worrying about them enough. And then we worry about what worry is doing to our health. National pastime. But Jesus says don't do it. Jesus says don't. He says that God will provide and God knows what we need to eat, to wear, to have, and He will provide it. We need to quit worrying about it, that He will provide our daily bread. Tell me this. In a world and in a society that is consumed with worry, what kind of a testimony would we have if we as individuals and we as a church lived in such a way that showed that we believed that God will provide for His children, that He loves His children and will give us our daily bread? What kind of a testimony would that have? We always talk about going out and preaching the gospel. I'll tell you what, there is a world that is looking for answers to the worries that they have. What if we lived in such a way as individuals? What if we as a church were a church that showed that we trust God to give us our daily bread? We know He loves us, and we know He's going to provide. What would that testimony look like? And I know it's tough sometimes because we've been let down. Anybody been let down? Trusted somebody, they let you down? Just a couple of us? Okay. Can you imagine, though, the peace that would come from trusting God who has never let us down? Ask for what you need. Realize what you have. We got a serving tray in our kitchen. I bought it for my dad about 5 years ago for Christmas because it was his philosophy on life. There's always something to be thankful for. And it's true. There's always something to be thankful for. But we don't always live that way. We always find something to complain about. We always find something else that we need or that's not big enough, good enough, fast, whatever it is. Have you ever met a truly entitled person? Have you ever met an entitled person? Somebody that just has no gratitude for what they get? Oh, isn't it just the most... Isn't it? I get thinking about this. What I find is interesting is most of the really, really entitled people that I know still have lots of stuff. They have plenty. Have you ever noticed that they probably have more money or a bigger house or whatever? They've got these things, but they feel entitled to them. They think they deserve them, so there is no gratitude for them. And you know what? So most of the entitled people that I know, even though they have more than me, they're some of the unhappiest people that I know. Because gratitude Gratitude feeds joy. Because when we realize where everything comes from, we're thankful for it. When we realize that God has blessed us, then we are grateful to God for what He has done for us. And so I think a lot of times, we aren't, honestly, the greatest tool that the devil has used against the American Christian and the American church is prosperity. It really is. We're not grateful for anything. We've got everything. I mean, we'll see it today. Honestly, we will see it today. Today is the 4th of July. It is Independence Day. And it is a celebration of the day that the Second Continental Congress signed the Declaration of Independence. They approved the Declaration of Independence. It is a celebration of the day that 13 separate and distinct colonies joined together and declared their independence from England and their interdependence upon one another. That's what the day's about. Most people will not celebrate that. They will eat hot dogs. I'm serious. They'll eat hot dogs. They'll have fun. They'll shoot off fireworks. That's what it's all about. Okay, it's not, and that's the thing I'm saying though is unfortunately, okay, and see now you're all like nodding your heads because you're like, yeah, we're good Americans. We know what it's about. Guys, we do the same thing on Sunday morning. We are not grateful, and we don't have the attitude of gratitude when we come in here on a Sunday morning to celebrate what it is all about. If so, the floor would be soaked with tears every Sunday. Communion time, you wouldn't be able to hear the music playing over the sobs of people that were realizing what they had been forgiven of and what Jesus had done. It would be a whole different place. We are an entitled, spoiled bunch of people. And now you're all jacked up and ready to go out. The thing is, though, that Jesus is calling us when He says, give us our daily bread, to live in an attitude of dependence, an attitude of gratitude for what we have, and to realize that, whatever that daily bread is that we're asking for, that we're coming to God and we are asking Him to provide what we need in the moment for the moment to accomplish this today, every single day. And tomorrow we're going to get up and say, Lord, thank you for yesterday. Give me today my daily bread. And at the end of that day, we're going to say, thank you, Lord, for the way you blessed me yesterday and everything that you did. Today, give me my daily bread. Give me the ability to do what needs to be done. So I want to do something here. I want to give you a visible image. Next time you pray, what I would like you to do is to imagine 3 buckets. Okay? 3 buckets sitting on a table. The first bucket is going to be your blessings. The things that you have, realizing what you have to be grateful for. And there's a lot of things you're going to put in this bucket. You're going to put your family in there. Maybe relationships that you have been blessed with. Connections that you have made. Friends that you have. It may be your health. Okay? It may be deliverance from something or a situation. But these are going to be the things, and you need to, when you go to God, those are your blessings. And that is, thank you, Lord. I am so grateful. I am so thankful for what you have done for me. When you delivered me, when you put this person in my life, when you did this for me. Thank you. I praise you and I honor you. That's the first bucket. The second bucket is our daily bread. There are a lot of things that are going to be in this bucket. Maybe a situation that you need guidance in. Maybe you're looking for wisdom in making a decision or moving forward. Maybe it's a struggle. Struggle in your personal life, maybe struggle in a relationship that you've got, maybe a relationship issues, whether it's one that you're in, one you want to be in, or one you need to be out of. Maybe you struggle with your anger. And you know that you want to be a better person, so you're asking God in your relationships to help you with your anger. Maybe you got a tough conversation that you need to have or a situation you need to do, and you're asking God for strength in doing that to handle that conflict. Maybe it is just conflict going on in your life and you don't know what to do with it. Maybe it's your finances. Maybe that's what your daily bread is. God, I need my job. I need this job. I need you to help us in this. Maybe it's patience. Patience is what you're needing now. Understanding. Maybe you need healing. Might be spiritual healing. Might be physical healing. But you know that right now that you're coming to God and you're just asking Him, no matter what it is. You're saying, Lord, give me today my daily bread. I need these things, and you're the only one that can provide them. And then there's the third bucket. And this bucket represents our worries. There are going to be things like issues in our lives. They may be circumstances that we have nothing, that we can't do anything about. It's just a circumstance we found ourselves in. We may worry about the future. Okay? Worried about what's going to happen in the future with their kids, with their whatever it is. You know, hey, man, we're worried about the way our kids are going to turn out. We're worried about what kind of a world they're going to live in. Maybe you're worried something about your spouse. Either something that they are doing, something they're going through, the way that whatever it is, you're fighting this. It may be an addiction that you are struggling with, and you get up there and you're worried, or it might be an addiction of a spouse or a friend, somebody you know. Maybe your emotions just overwhelm you. You cannot keep them under control, and you're always worried about the way that you're going to handle a situation. Maybe it's just frustrations. Those are the things we worry about the most because we can't do anything about them. Getting angry about things. Anxiety. Got a bad situation going on. Worried about your safety. What's going on in our world? What's going to happen with the weather? What's going to happen on the other side of the world? Is there going to be wars? Is there going to be this? What about crime? Maybe you worry about the fact that you just can't handle what somebody did to you. See, and these represent all of our worries. But the thing is that what you and I need to do, that seems to be the bucket that always has the most in it. Have you ever noticed that? And we'll come with our blessings, and we'll come with our daily bread, and then we'll pick up our worry bucket and we will go on about our lives. The fact is, though, that God opposes the proud. He gives grace to the humble. Those that will empty their worry bucket. So I'm not going to worry about it because I can't do a thing about it. Give us today our daily bread. I'm going to ask you to stand. We're going to have our time of decision. What is your daily bread? What is the thing that as you come here this morning that you need? It is that thing, and maybe you've been holding on to it. You've been trying to handle it. You've been trying to do it on your own, and you realize that daily bread is not about food on the table. It's not about zeros in a bank account. It is all about God working in my life. It is about God giving me what I need today to accomplish what I need to do today. What is your daily bread? I'm going to challenge, we're going to have our time of decision. Maybe you need to come down front and you need to make a decision. Maybe you need to step into one of our prayer rooms and you would like one of our elders, one of their wives, to pray with you and to pray for you. Maybe, though, you've just got something, it is that thing, it is the daily bread you need, but you've never been able to take it out of the worry bucket and put it into the daily bread bucket. And what I'm going to ask you to do, there should still be, there's a connection card, there is an index card, there is something on the back of the chair in front of you. And whether you want to write it down right now, that would be great. Maybe you just need to look at that piece of paper and visualize yourself writing it down. But whatever that thing is that you just cannot seem to get out of that bucket and put into the daily bread bucket, would you do that right now? Look at it, think about it, pray about it, and say, God, I'm asking you first and foremost, give me the strength to take this situation with my husband, with my wife, with my kids, at my work, my anger, my frustration, my anxiety. Help me to take it out of this bucket and put it in the only one that is ever going to see any result, the daily bread bucket. And then do it. If you have decisions to make,